Hi, my name is Van, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. I'm originally from Arizona, although I currently reside in San Diego, California. I'm serving as the 2020-2021 Gilman Ambassador Digital Representative, having received the Gilman Scholarship for the 2018-2019 academic year, where I studied in France. While abroad, I was a part-time English tutor. I was a member and co-founder of the Queer Club Unite. I was a member of the Aviron Club rowing team. And I recently graduated from San Diego State University with a degree in international business with an emphasis in French and Western Europe. And I'm currently studying to take my LSAT and GMAT exams, hopefully to enter a dual MBA JD program. My assistant who's going to be moderating the chat. So if you have any questions at all during the session, feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll get to them as time allows, more toward the end of the chat, more toward the end of the session rather, in the Q&A session. So my assistant is Kat Harrell. She's originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and she completed her undergrad degree at Samford University in Birmingham. And during her time in Samford, she spent a semester and a January term studying in London and traveled to 11 countries in Europe while abroad. After graduation, she spent 7 months exploring New Zealand before moving to Colorado. Kat completed her master's degree at the University of Denver before stepping into the realm on international education, guiding students through the process of studying abroad at New Zealand universities. Today, Kat partners with university faculty to build short-term study abroad programs across the globe. She also co-chairs World Strides Custom Programs DEI team and works to help faculty, students, and teammates celebrate diversity and champion social justice. When she's not working, Kat explores the Rocky Mountains with her partner, reads science fiction novels, and plays fetch with her rescue cat, Harry. Okay, going on to our panelists. So our first panelist is Desirée Daring. She is one of the co-founders of Fulbright Noir. She currently teaches math at an international school in Barcelona, Spain. And before moving to Barcelona, she was the 2018-2019 Fulbright Culture and Pedagogy Canary Islands mentor for 25 English teaching assistants. And she was a 2017-2018 Fulbright ETA in La Rioja, Spain. Desirée recently graduated from Williams College with a bachelor's in anthropology, a concentration in legal studies, and a certificate in Spanish. She started her professional teaching career in Lawrence, Massachusetts as a 6th grade math teacher through Teach for America. And within 2 years, she earned her master's in curriculum and teaching from Boston University. While in Lawrence, Desirée kept very busy. She served as a 6th grade teacher, a 6th grade team leader for 2 years, was appointed to her district's teacher leadership cabinet, and was named a Massachusetts Teach Plus Policy Fellow, and coached pre-service teachers and her colleagues in classroom management and instruction. So yes, Desirée was very busy. She's also an active athlete, and as such has created and coached cross-country and track and field teams at her school in Lawrence. And looking ahead, she's very excited for her next adventure. She recently accepted a job as an elementary teacher in an international school in Belgium. So congratulations on that, Desirée. Our second panelist is Max Courval. Max recently graduated from Arizona State University with a Bachelor's of Arts in Geography. He studied abroad in Lisbon, Portugal as a Gilman Scholar in 2019 and participated in a virtual exchange to Florianopolis, Brazil through the Critical Language Scholarship in 2020. He is currently a CLS Alumni Ambassador for 2021 and is planning to start a master's degree in Latin American Studies this fall. And our third and final panelist is Brava. She's going to be joining us a little bit later. She had some issues with a delayed flight connection, so hopefully we'll see her later on in the session. But according to her, she is an immigrant, humanist, free thinker, mother, philomath, traveler, and feminist. She loves traveling, and doing so has helped her to see the world in a diverse way. She loves intelligent debates, cooking, meeting people from new cultures, blogging, reading, She loves music and women's empowerment. She believes knowledge and education are the world's future salvation, and her goal is to be able to empower women and minorities worldwide. She loves writing, music, film, people, and traveling. And her motto, that is her own quote, is "Life is the results of our choices." So thank you everyone for joining our session. Thank you panelists, and thank you Kat for moderating that chat box. So we'll just go ahead and jump in here with our first question. And I will go ahead and just start off with Max. I'll direct this question to you first. So which country did you go to and why?
I went to Lisbon, Portugal in fall 2019. One of the reasons why I chose Portugal was because I wanted to continue my Portuguese language studies. And I also applied for the Gilman Scholarship, which has an additional $3,000 award for those who learn a critical need language. So I figured that was like a good opportunity to help fund my study abroad even further. And Portugal was one of the countries where you could go study Portuguese. And also, the way my university worked at ASU, it had like a select list of affiliate programs to choose from. And this program in Lisbon, Portugal was the only program really at my university that went to a Portuguese speaking country. So it kind of, everything just lined up perfectly.
All right, thanks Max for that. And then Desiree, I'm just gonna pass it off to you. Same question, which country did you go to and why?
Cool. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. So I chose Spain. So a little bit of background about me. My family speaks Spanish. They're from Panama. And my dad immigrated to the States when he was, I would say, in his late teens. And so when he moved here and married my mom's parents are also from Panama, but she was born in the States. And then my brother and I were also born in the States. So my dad didn't end up teaching my brother or myself Spanish, but I always grew up around Spanish, and all of my relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody speaks Spanish. So growing up, I always felt like there was something missing. And so once I was in college, I was like, okay, like I'm going to have so many opportunities to study abroad. Let's go ahead and study abroad. And so I ended up studying abroad in Madrid because there was a program that Williams partnered with Hamilton College. And so I ended up going to Madrid via this study abroad program. And I absolutely fell in love. I fell in love with the culture. I fell in love with the city. I love that I was in Europe and that I could also go and explore different areas around Europe. And I also studied anthropology. And so like studying different people and learning about different cultures, it was my jam. So once I finished studying abroad, I was like, okay, I need to get back to Spain. How can I get back to Spain? And I also did a lot of volunteer work, working with kids and like helping them with tutoring and with reading and with math and things like that. And so I always have always worked with kids. And so I saw that there was the Fulbright English teaching assistant program. And I was like, okay, like this is great. I can teach and I could live in Spain. Like that's amazing. And so that's essentially why I picked Spain, because again, I was able to go back to Spain, enjoy the culture, be in Europe, but also be in a Spanish speaking country where I continue to practice my Spanish. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Desiree. Very thorough. I appreciate that. And also I just want to take a moment to draw attention to your backgrounds. They're amazing. I love that. Thank you so much for representing. We represent. Okay, and then as I mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat box and we will get to those probably more toward the end of the session in the Q&A. So just moving on to the next question that we have here. So going back to Max, what were some of the strategies that you used in choosing your country, or what were some of the factors involved when you were choosing your country to go abroad?
I had a lot of different strategies. Well, the way that at my university, I received a lot of both need-based and merit-based scholarships, both of which had stipulations as to how you could use those funds to study abroad. And a lot of that was, for example, I might be able to use it for a semester-long program, but I wouldn't be able to use it for a summer study abroad program, or I would only be able to use so much for a semester or a year. So I had to really like do a deep dive into my finance portal at my university to really understand, before I even start searching for a country or program, what is feasible, what type of program is feasible for someone who wouldn't be able to study abroad without, using these types of scholarships. So the way I had to look for programs that were semester long, that way so I could apply my semester scholarships to my study abroad program. And from there, I was able to look at programs that offered what I was interested in that would help me get further in my degree, because I was studying both geography, but I also had a certificate in Brazilian studies. So I wanted to find a program that would allow me the flexibility to study both Portuguese language and be immersed in Portuguese language on a daily basis, but also allow me some flexibility to study things not related to Portuguese culture or language, and would allow me to study things for my geography degree and my urban planning minor. And so from there, I was able to use these criteria to find the perfect program for me, and which allowed me to study both Portuguese language and take courses in architecture and urban planning in Portugal that would therefore count towards my degree back in the States.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks for that answer. And then Desiree, same question. I'll just restate the question. So what were some of the strategies that you used, or some of the, the things you had to consider when choosing your program or choosing your country of your host country?
Yeah, so right after I studied abroad, I knew that I was going to return to Spain. It was just going to be a matter of how. And then because I had done so much work with students and volunteering in schools and things like that, like the Fulbright just was the most logical option. And so really it was quite easy for me to choose the country. It was going to be Spain, because I wanted to be in a Spanish speaking country in Europe so that I could travel all over Europe and again, just get to know different people from different cultures. And I mean, I still live in Europe and it's awesome. I can get on a plane and post COVID, it's going to be a lot easier, but I can get on a plane and, in 2 hours, I can be in somewhere completely different from Spain. And so that I really do love that. And then again, Fulbright is such a prestigious scholarship, prestigious grant. And then I'm still a teacher right now. So I think that's another reason why I leaned towards the Fulbright, because it's really a nice accomplishment also as a teacher to get a Fulbright scholarship. So yeah, so for me, it was a pretty easy decision.
Thank you for sharing. And I feel like kind of just piggybacking on what our panelists said, I think everyone's strategy is different, based on, a variety of factors, right? So for me, I think choosing my program, as I mentioned, I studied in France. I speak French. I wanted to work international business. So I went to a bilingual French-English school that was a business school in France. So it was a very logical choice for me. And I was able to do so, thanks to the Gilman. And I also am a Jack Kent Cooke scholar. So for me, fortunately, finances weren't as at the forefront as some of the, other factors that I considered. So, it's very kind of just reiterating. I think it's, it's really dependent upon, everybody's individual situation. So thank you for sharing. So on that note, we'll just go into our third planned question here. So how important was the program you chose? And I guess by important, how important was that to your personal, your academic, and your professional goals, either going to grad school or in employment? So how important was the program that you chose? And Max, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I think the program really was the most important part of my study abroad trip. I studied abroad with CIEE, the Council on International Education and Exchange, and they really had a very thorough, laid out program that had lots of support for students, had a lot of great staff in Lisbon to help with a lot of different academic questions. They had great classes, and I think my program really was able to meet my academic and professional needs. I had taken all the Portuguese classes I could at ASU, and there was like no more options for me except to study abroad. So my program really offered me the ability to advance my language skills a lot further and in like a more advanced and formal context, which I think was really great. And therefore, it allowed me to gain a higher level of fluency that I can use in for applications for jobs, for grad school. And it also really, I think, my program kind of turned my mind more interested in like cultural studies moving forward. And that's why I'm applying to a Latin American studies program for a master's. And I think it really like reinvigorated my interest in like the international field and like international studies. So I think the program is almost just as important as the country you choose, because the right program can really make your experience like that much better, no matter what country you're in.
And I agree on the program, you know, I mean, I think it's important to be in a place you want to be in, you know, something of interest, you know, probably something of interest that's also connected to, you know, your goals, you know, your aspirations. And also I experienced something sort of similar with the language. There were more language French classes available at San Diego State. However, they sort of went and maybe, even though I was interested, went in a slightly different direction than maybe I really wanted to go. Like they went into French literature and things, which again sounds interesting, but maybe not right for me. So the logical next step for me also was studying abroad. So Desirée, same question. So how important was the program that you chose? Same regarding your personal, academic, and professional goals.
Yeah, so like I said before, you know, Fulbright is super prestigious, and because so my senior year of college, I actually got involved with a group called Students for Educational Reform, and through that group, I went to a conference at Harvard, and there the executive director of TFA was speaking. And up until that point, like I didn't really know about TFA. Like I had heard about it on campus, but I didn't really know about it. And so I went up to him after his speech, and he was like, do you know anything about TFA? And I was like, not really. And he was like, well, this is, you know, everything that you should know about it. And this is why you should apply. And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, you should apply. And I was like, okay, I'll throw my name in the hat. And so actually it's a good thing that I did, because I applied for Fulbright right out of college, got through to the final round, and then didn't end up getting it in the end. So of course I thought the world was over. And I, you know, did Teach for America for 4 years. And then I said, okay, I'm going to throw my name in the hat again, reapply for Fulbright, and got it. So I always knew that I wanted to do Fulbright because, again, like it had that teaching component. I had gotten involved with this group, Students for Education Reform. So I like knew I wanted to go into education, because before then I was on the track to law school. And so I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I knew that I wanted to go into teaching. So like Fulbright paired my love of traveling and teaching abroad. So I knew that's the program that I wanted to go to and go through. And so even though I didn't get it the first time, it's also really important to say out loud, you know, if it doesn't happen the first time, that's okay. A lot of these programs you can apply again and again and again. And so that's also something to keep in mind. And that for me, it actually worked out incredibly well, because the second time that I got it, or the second time I applied and got it, midway through that year, Fulbright Spain expanded their territory, like their Fulbright, where they are with Fulbright, into the Canary Islands. And so I was able, they basically told us, you know, if you want, you can stay another year. You just kind of have to reapply and like send us an essay. And I was like, okay, so you're telling me I can get another Fulbright, you know, staying in this beautiful country, living in the Canary Islands, that's a no-brainer. So I reapplied and I got it. And I was lucky enough to be chosen to be the mentor for, you know, the 25 grantees in the Canary Islands. And so I was not only another Fulbright scholar, but I was a mentor. You know, I had a leadership role, and it was just like, it was amazing. And then all the while I was still teaching. And so Fulbright, being a ETA through Fulbright, really, really helped me. And then from there, I was able to stay in Spain and be a teacher at an international school. So again, you know, just that extra experience in Spain allowed me to better my Spanish and make more connections. And then I was able to kind of get my foot in the door in the international school world. So yeah, so you never know. And it really worked out for me. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. You never know. And thanks for also bringing attention to the fact that applicants should try and try and try again. Just because you don't receive it the first time does not mean that you won't receive it the second or third time. As Desiree said, definitely keep trying to get those for sure. Okay, so it doesn't look like we really have any questions yet, but that's okay. We have some more questions here for the panelists that we prepared. So kind of just speaking on the program still. I know you both kind of mentioned this a little bit. So did you pick sort of like quote unquote the perfect program, or do you wish you would have chose, in hindsight, chose a different program, or kind of how did that work out for you regarding that? So Max, I'll direct this question to you first. So did you pick the perfect program, or do you wish that maybe you chose a slightly different one?
I really liked my program. I think it was perfect for my needs as an undergraduate student. I think my journey in picking a program started like a long time ago at the beginning of my freshman year in college, because I knew I'd wanted to study abroad. Like, this was a goal of mine. And I was like looking on my study abroad website at all these different programs, and I had found some programs in Brazil that I was interested in. And so I like had them saved and like on the website. And then at the beginning of junior year, I went to go look at them, and I found out that like all the programs in Brazil got canceled. So I had to like basically start over. And so I just ended up finding this program to study abroad in Lisbon, Portugal. And so it was kind of amazing how you might have plans for something, and you might like think, this is like, it's going to be this, 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 and this, like you have a direct plan. And that's great. Like, it's good to have a plan, but sometimes there are going to be bumps in the road. Sometimes a program might be canceled and you'll have to readjust. And so, but even if that happens, like, I don't let that deter you, because you still might be able to find the perfect program like I did, because I really enjoyed my program in Portugal because I met all my needs. I was also able to learn a new variety of Portuguese, European Portuguese, which is quite different from Brazilian Portuguese. And I hadn't had much contact with that variety of the language at Arizona State University. So all in all, I think it really was the perfect program for me.
All right, thanks, Max. And then Desiree, same question.
Yeah, so I honestly, I cannot be more of a champion for Fulbright Spain. And for Fulbright, I absolutely loved my program. I loved my experience. I feel very fortunate that I'm still able to be in Spain. One of my best friends in the program is in Madrid. So it's been really cool that my Fulbright crew is still here. And yeah, I mean, I honestly, I feel like I chose the perfect program for me. Again, I wanted to go abroad teaching, in another culture, specifically in Spain. And, Fulbright Spain offered me that exact opportunity. And then and I know other Fulbright commissions don't necessarily have a mentorship program. I know Spain is one of the few ones that does. So I also think that that was perfect, because I was able to then use the mentoring experience I had in the States and bring it with me to my my grant year as a Fulbright scholar, and so, or Fulbright grantee. And so I just feel really fortunate that I was able to have that that experience. So yeah, I feel like Fulbright met all of my needs and then provided me with new opportunities, because honestly, I never imagined that I would be living in the Canary Islands for a year, like never in my wildest dreams. And then Fulbright Spain made that happen. So I think, just to echo what Max said, you never know. And just because you have a plan, you really just don't know. And I think if I were to also say one piece of advice to the attendees, I would say just say yes, as long as it's safe and doesn't hurt you. Then I would say just say yes, because I think there were so many adventures that I had during my Fulbright experience, and they were awesome. And they were because I said yes, because I was going to step out of my comfort zone and I was going to take advantage of everything that was being offered. So yeah, I would say Fulbright was perfect for me.
Thanks, Desiree. And then Max, I see you shaking your head. Did you have something that you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I just really like Desiree's point too about the friends that she made and like the connections she made with other people on her Fulbright program. I think that's also another important part of like these big national programs like Fulbright, or whether you're studying abroad with, you might be the only student from your school. I was the only student from ASU at my program. And so I think it's a really unique opportunity to get to meet American students from across the country and from different regions who you might not met before. And I think like the program not only allows you to like be a part of a new culture and like get to visit other places, but you also get to meet like, you know, people from different cultures in your home country. And when you leave your program, you now have this like network of people both abroad, but also back at home who have similar interests to you, because obviously they chose the same program as you for a reason. And so I think that's like a really understated part, is that you have this network of people like to reach out to and talk to once you get back.
Awesome, thank you. And then I'm glad you both kind of brought up, you know, the idea of, I think, you know, I look at Fulbright community and Gilman Scholarship communities and, you know, these like scholarship communities in general. It's like a way to stay connected with like-minded individuals all across the country or all across the world. And that's one of the things that I really, you know, enjoy about that. And then kind of touching base on kind of what Desiree and Max, what you both said, you know, find the program that is, you know, hopefully perfect for you, but best fitting. But I think that I am also a yes person. And so kind of just saying yes and maybe being flexible. Maybe it's not, you know, at least at first, you know, sight, it's maybe not your perfect program, but being flexible and what it might end up becoming, you know, the perfect program that you know, you didn't realize in the beginning. So thanks for mentioning those two things. Okay, so we'll just move on to our next question. I don't think we have any questions yet in the chat, and that's okay. We have time for Q&A at the end. So if you could do it again, although I think we all kind of know the answer to this question, but just to elaborate, if you could all do it again, what country would you choose? Max, I'll direct this one to you first.
Sure. I really loved applying. I really loved my time in Portugal, and so I definitely would want to do it again. But like I said at the beginning, I didn't know, like I never had even like considered studying abroad in Portugal, like my freshman or sophomore, even junior year, because like what I thought I might have wanted to study, you know, those programs were canceled. So I had to be flexible, like Van was talking about, and like look at other different options. And it's not really settling. It's really just, I think, you just now have to like maybe, you know, look at the actual programs themselves and see what fits with your academic career and your professional aspirations. I also did apply for Fulbright Portugal this year. I wasn't selected, but like I still think like obviously I really want to return to Portugal, and you know, I think it really was like a difficult year, especially in terms of applications and stuff. But I think once you go abroad, like there's like this urge in you to like actually like want to go back, because no matter how much time you might spend there, there's always like this connection you form, and it almost feels like your own, like another home for you, like another place that like you feel like your heart is there. So I think I really like would never want to, you know, I'm open to all these other experiences, but I'll always have like a, you know, special place for memories of my time in Portugal.
All right, thanks, Max. And I just wanted to add something to that. So your host country really does become like your second home. In fact, when we were having a pre-session with all of our panelists, you know, I mentioned that my culture shock was worse returning back to the United States than it was going into France. And I think that was part of it, was, you know, I really felt that connection. So thanks for that. So Desiree, same question. Again, I feel like we already know the answer, but if you could do it again, which country would you choose?
Yeah, hands down, Spain, hands down. Yeah, honestly, I felt like, and thankfully I was able to come here before COVID. I feel like now living here, like it's so different post-COVID. I think just the Spanish culture and everything is so lively and active and fun, and just it's so like just people love to have fun. And so I really, really, really enjoyed my time in Spain during my Fulbright years. And I would, yeah, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I definitely would pick Spain again. And then I was going to mention something about what Max was saying last time about the friends that you have. Um, you also then have a network of people, like through Fulbright in my case, or through Gilman, or through any of the other fellowships. And that's actually how I met the co-founders of Fulbright Noir, which is really cool. So just a quick synopsis of that. Fulbright Noir is an Instagram platform that promotes and showcases the experiences of Black Fulbrighters, and then also like supports prospective grantees to like apply, and kind of just like shows the kind of, you know, the diversity that is the Fulbright program. And so it was cool because I was on Instagram and I just saw that, you know, the other one of the other founders had Fulbright in her name. And I was like, huh, Fulbright, let me check her out. So I clicked on her, and it turns out that she was a Fulbrighter in Belgium. And I saw this like the week before I was going to Belgium. I had never been to Belgium. It was my first time. I was just going on a solo trip. And so I was like, okay, you know, she's a Fulbrighter, I'm a Fulbrighter, we have that connection. So then I messaged her, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm coming to Belgium, you know, could we meet up? And she's like, yeah, sure. And then, you know, we ended up hanging out. We're like, you know, really good friends at this point. And with her, I actually helped to co-found the Fulbright Noir platform. And so it's just really cool, like going off of what Max said, you know, now that you're in this program, you don't just have the friends that you meet, you know, in your program, all from all over the country and the States, but now you have a network of people who are all over the world, which is pretty cool. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So all that is to say, I would pick Spain again in a heartbeat.
And Max, did you want to add on to that?
Oh, I was just going to bring up another point about like choosing, like if you would go again, if you choose. I think like once you go abroad once, like in some place you may like learn about other countries or other cultures that you might have not have thought about studying abroad in before, or wanting to study abroad before, or just traveling to. And I think especially in Europe, since it's so easy to travel around, you might find other places that you might have not been interested in before suddenly become, oh, maybe next time I go abroad, or if I try to go abroad again, I might want to study abroad there too. So don't limit yourself. I think that's like a really important like thing about like just keeping an open mind.
Awesome, thank you. I agree. I think in many different ways, studying abroad opens up doors, you know, in many different ways. So we still haven't, there's no questions yet. That's okay. Just a reminder to all of our attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and either myself or Kat will get to those, and we'll have the panelists answer your questions. So in the meantime, we do have a kind of another question that actually we came up with during our pre-session in preparing for this conference. So I know the panelists kind of discussed safety abroad. And so I wanted to maybe have them address that. So being concerned about the safety of programs, or being concerned about the safety of abroad, like was that ever a consideration for either one of you? You know, were there issues of safety abroad? You know, how do you kind of, you know, what is safety compared to like to the United States, or what was unsafe? If either one of you maybe want to like talk on that, feel free.
Okay, I can go. So safety, yeah. So at least for Fulbright, I felt really safe. And I guess in Spain, I felt really safe. I mean, also in the States, I've, you know, felt safe. I'm from New York. I also lived in Massachusetts, so I felt safe in both of those places. But I also felt incredibly safe in Spain. I feel like, you know, people stay out until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and it is totally fine. And that definitely was new to me. But yeah, like people stay out, and you know, in that regard, it's pretty safe. And just like walking down the street, you know, during the day, during at night, definitely felt safe. And then specifically within Fulbright, they have the Fulbright Assist, and they have, you know, the commissions and the people who are there to support you. And so I felt like there were different avenues that I could go to and reach out to if I ever needed help with anything. And then I also, you know, in my day to day, I felt very safe. So I never really had any issues about, you know, feeling uncomfortable or things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think similarly for Gilman and like my study abroad program, there's like a really good network both within your program where you'll have like emergency contact information. I got a card that like had my name and like my number and like who to call, like if you find this or something, and like in case of emergencies. And also for Gilman, like you're required to report when you're leaving your host country. If you're going to visit another country, you have to make sure to let Gilman know, so that way they're able to like keep track of your whereabouts. And so in case you do get in any danger or an unsafe situation, they're able to help you. And I really felt Portugal also was just safe in general. I never felt similarly to Spain. People stay out late. And so it was like natural. And I also knew that like there was a good network, and like especially having like program health insurance, you know, that's another way like thinking about safety. I always knew if anything were to happen, I did have health insurance while I was abroad, and I didn't have to worry so much about that aspect of my safety. And it's just important, of course, to like have some common sense. I think the most important part about staying safe is just having your own common sense and knowing, okay, this looks safe. And if you don't think something is so safe, maybe just like say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to do it. And don't feel like you have to pressure yourself into doing something that you might feel unsafe doing, because there's so many other things you can be doing while abroad, and you don't need to feel peer pressured in any way.
Right. Thank you both for that. And kind of piggybacking on that, or reiterating kind of like what you both have said, you know, there's like, you have connections, you know, you have a network, you have resources. The Gilman and the Fulbright aren't just sending you abroad and then leaving you there and you're there by yourself. So, you know, there are people to you know, to reach out to. And then also is something that we had spoken again in the pre-session about, even the perception of going to an unsafe environment, and a lot of the things that people may, you know, see as unsafe, or things that are really unsafe. You know, I think we have to stop and look and realize that a lot of those same things also occur back home. They occur in our own country as well. And so if there's political unrest in such and such country, well, there's political unrest here. You know, trying to determine, you know, what is the level of political unrest, you know, I mean, how serious is this? I mean, you know, and definitely something that you should be aware of before you go, as well as, you know, kind of staying updated on while abroad as well. Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions yet. We do have a few more minutes. We're gonna go until 50, so we've got about 9 more minutes left to chat. Kat did bring up a good question for you both in the panel here. She sent me a message. So there's a couple of questions. I think one that's really good that she brought up is there anything you wish you had known about studying in Europe prior to your program? So something that maybe you wish you would have known that you didn't find out until after you were abroad, or until after you come home, something you wish you would have known.
I wish I would have known not to bring so many clothes, like at least in Portugal. I don't know. I feel like I should have packed a little more in advance. And I think like students our age in Portugal, I think a lot of times they'll see them wear maybe a lot of the same clothes sometimes, like they like, go through different outfits all the time. And so I feel like I probably should have brought less clothes because I ended up not wearing, a lot of my clothes that I brought, or maybe wearing them once. So I think knowing that, and also being from Arizona, it was like hot. And I went to Lisbon, which is a nice climate, but it was still like a lot cooler and rainier than I like expected. And so I think I also probably would have wanted to prepare a little more about, knowing the weather, and also getting like, the right jacket, because you can buy stuff while you're there abroad, but it's just good to know what you do and do not need to bring on your trip from the US.
Okay, Desiree, I see you nodding your head yes. Is there something that you wanted to add on to that?
No, I was nodding yes. It was like, oh yeah, that's a good point, because I'm moving to Belgium, and Belgium is considerably more rainy than Spain. So I was like, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to invest in a good rain jacket. But I'm trying to think, is there anything that I'm drawing a blank. I'm drawing a blank as to like anything that I wish I would have known before. I guess because like prior to coming abroad, because Spain has the Fulbright mentors, the mentor for my year reached out to us. And so I was like constantly communicating with her just to like ask her all my questions and get all my doubts covered and answered. So when I came to Spain, I actually felt really comfortable. I felt really prepared, I guess also because I had lived in the country before, so it wasn't completely new. So yeah, and Max, I have a ton of clothes, so I probably could have also packed less clothes. Yeah, but
I had to pay for like overweight baggage and everything on the way back home. I was like, oh gosh, I have too much stuff.
Well, what I did is I just wore a bunch of layers.
Perfect.
I just wore a bunch of layers. But yeah, nothing is coming up. So yeah.
I do think one thing I wish I had known was like how many holidays there were, or like days off that like things don't work. Cause like in the US, like even on like a lot of our holidays, things are still open. But one time I was like traveling and I didn't realize it was a holiday. It was like a Sunday, and I was in Madeira, Portugal, which is near Canary Islands. And I was there like on a holiday, and I took like a bus like to the other side of the island, and I was looking at the schedule for Sundays or Saturdays, I think, and I didn't realize it was a holiday, and I wasn't looking at the holiday schedule. So I got like stranded on the other side of the island because I missed the last bus, because I thought there was another one coming. And so I had to like call a taxi, and it was like expensive. So I think knowing that, like making sure you're aware of like holidays, because especially in Southern Europe and Portugal and Spain, they're a lot more frequent and can affect the services that you might, normally be accustomed to having in the US, like at all time.
Yeah, and in Spain, they love their holidays. And also, like in Spain specifically, they have the siesta. So, like from 2 to 4, or like from 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, things are closed. And so, like if you're at school or you're teaching and you want to like go to the bank, then you have to like go before school or right at the start of lunch, or you have to go after, the siesta time. So that can also be challenging, especially coming from the States where things are kind of open all day. If depending on the country that you go to, you have to schedule your day around, opening and closing times, and just getting used to that different culture for sure.
All right, thanks for that. So we do have just a few minutes left before we wrap up here. If anyone has any final questions, give us a shout out. It looks like Kat actually left a question. Our assistant left a question in the chat box. So what she asked is there one thing in particular you would tell an applicant why the location where you studied is a great place to do a program? So whoever wants to tackle that one first, feel free.
Sure. I really love studying abroad in Portugal, and I think one of the great things, especially if you're applying to Gilman, and you want to apply to Europe, but you might also want, an extra boost of funding, applying to Portugal is great because if you take Portuguese language classes, you can get up to 3,000 extra in scholarship funds just because you're studying Portuguese in Portugal. And that also might apply to, other critical languages in Europe like Russian. So I would say, look at those options. And if you want to do Europe, but you're looking for different types of ways to fund it through Gilman or whatever, look at if they offer any type of language instruction and bonuses for learning these types of critical need languages. And also I think Portugal and Lisbon in general, it's a little bit more sheltered from American study abroad, or it's not like the powerhouse, say, that Spain or France or Italy is. And so I think it offers like a unique experience. Like you might be one of the only few Americans actually studying abroad in Portugal compared to other destinations in Europe. And I think it's just like just Lisbon itself is a really charming, historical and unique city. And you're able to, I don't know, it's like opens doors to so many different parts of the world, not just Europe, but, in Africa and Asia and Latin America. So I think it's a really unique place.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. Okay. And Desiree, I want you to answer the question. We have like 1 minute left. If you could answer that really quickly.
Yeah, sure. So again, I'm sure at this point, you know that I'm a big proponent of Spain. And one thing that I really like about Spain is that it's so diverse in the places that you could go and even just the people that you can meet. So I have lived in Madrid. I've lived in La Rioja, which is in northern Spain. It's like known for its wine. I've lived in the Canary Islands. I've lived in Valencia, and now I live in Barcelona. And so like I've lived in a bunch of different places in Spain. I've also traveled to the south. And no matter where I go, like La Rioja is very, very small. I definitely was like one of the few Americans that a lot of my students have met. Then I went to the Canary Islands, so I was, living on an island. I lived in Madrid and now I live in Barcelona. And so like those are two of the bigger cities. And then Valencia is like a mini Barcelona. And so I just feel that, and then southern Spain is completely different to everything up in the north. And so I really do appreciate that wherever you go in Spain, it's so diverse and it's so varied. And you can just really like, if you want to be in the metropolitan city, you can be in Madrid or Barcelona. But if you want to be in like the heart of Spain, then you can be in La Rioja. If you want the islands, then you can be in the Canary Islands. Or if you want, like the flamenco dancing and things like that, and like the Andalusian, culture, then you can be in the south. And so for that reason, I just really, really like Spain because it's so diverse and everywhere is so different, but it's so amazing and so fun. So yeah, I feel like it has a lot to offer to whatever you're looking for in your travels or in your studying abroad.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for sharing your experiences and all the information. Thank you attendees for joining this session. I think we're about out of time. And I want to thank the We Represent conference team members for putting this together and allowing us, giving us this platform to have these conversations, to have these discussions. It's really important. I hope you all enjoyed it. Yeah, again, thanks everyone for joining in. But I think we're about out of time. I guess any last final comments before we get cut off?
Thank you for coming. It was really great. I'm so excited to be here and participate.